Hey guys, my name is Eleni. I'm an alcoholic. I'm gonna move a little away from this because I'm very loud and I don't want to blow out all your ears. Okay. This is my hometown, Dover, Delaware. I'm so excited to be here. I've been excited for months. My family's still here. I moved some years ago to Northern Virginia. I love it there. But this is where I'm from. This is where I'm born and raised. This is where my parents had businesses all throughout town that I worked in. And I got cleanance over here. So Dover, Delaware has my heart. And I'm just so happy to be here. I wanted to start with a story, actually. So both my parents are Greek, and I went to Greece this past summer, and I saw one of my cousins, and she was talking to me about the Maniatis. So our family is from an area in Greece called Mani, so we call ourselves the Maniatis. And it's right below Sparta, and we're like the descendants of the Spartans and the fiercest of the Greeks, and also the craziest of the Greeks. And like they kicked off the revolution in 1821 against the Ottoman Empire. They're just these famous people in Greece. And she's telling me all these things about the Maniatis, and she said, there's something about them that they're known for. She said, the Maniati walks up to somebody and is telling them something that they're planning to do. And the person gives them a better way to do it, an easier, a faster, a more advantageous, maybe they'll even make more money doing it. The Maniati will say, thank you very much, they'll walk away, and they're gonna do whatever they had set out in their mind to do, period. And they're not gonna change course until they've slammed their head against the wall enough times to maybe listen. And if I ever heard a more accurate description of every alcoholic I ever met, this past summer I realized that was the core of all of every problem I ever had. I don't listen. I have it set out in my mind. I think I'm smart enough. I think I got it together. I think I can do it. And I'm always going to do it my way. And then I might listen the second, the third, or the fifth, or the 10th time. Oh, my sponsor did tell me a long time ago I could do this. Or the guy with 30 years who's already been through it already told me I could do it another way. And then I will finally do it. And that is why my suffering and my road was so long and so hard. It went on forever in AA because I don't listen the first time. I think that we determine our length of suffering from the moment we step in here, depending on how willing we are. That's why they keep talking about willingness. How willing are you to listen? Because we are hard-headed people. Every one of you are just like the descendants of the Spartans. I'm telling you, we are so stubborn. So my story, everything really kicked off when I was 15. A lot happened when I was 15. So when I was 11, actually, my dad stopped drinking cold turkey. He became a dry drunk. He was ordered to go to AA meetings where he would go to sleep and snore very loudly in these meetings. And he would go to the drug counselor, and the counselor would say, why do you drink? And he'd say, it's my wife, she's why I drink. And so the counselor would look at my mom and say, oh, how much do you drink? Oh, I don't drink at all, And it was just like, he took no responsibility for it at all, but I had a violent alcoholic father up until 11, and then he had to quit drinking because he came this close to going to jail for all of his drunk driving. I became a drunk driver later. And so he was still wild and crazy, less the violence. And then I grew up in him and my mom's restaurants, and they taught me how to work really hard, and they taught me a lot of good things, and they provided everything for me. And I turned out really normal somehow. And middle school was like the best years of my life. And then freshman year in high school was the best year of my life again. And then I turned 15, and all of a sudden I got slammed with problems. It was like a light switch went off in my brain, and one day I was normal, and the next day I had bipolar disorder. And I didn't talk about that in the rooms for 15 years because I was so ashamed. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago, I went to speak to some people at a full diagnosis place, and the man was in AA, and he spoke to those girls also, and he said, the brain can fail you just like any other organ in the body. And when he said that, all the shame I had over this finally left me, and now I talk openly about it. And at the same time, when I was 15, I was also hit with juvenile arthritis. And I didn't have a simple case of arthritis. I had a severe case of arthritis. So now mentally, I'm manic, which is really, really high, and then I'm having periods of normalcy, and then I'm depressed and really, really low. And the irritability, when they say restless, irritable, discontent, it was just all day, every day, and I was suffering so badly, and I start to go to all the doctors, and I'm in the offices with crazy people, or I'm in offices with old people, and I'm just like, what is going on? And When I would sit in the offices with the older people for arthritis, I was terrified. It started with fear. Oh my God, if I'm this debilitated and I feel this way at 15, what's it going to be like when I'm 25 and when I'm 35 and I have a mental illness on top of it and I can't control my emotions and what's going to happen? And it all started with fear. I had PTSD symptoms from when I was younger as well. I had chronic nightmares every night of my life. It was far back as I can remember till I was 4 years old up until this point. And when I say I was suffering, I was suffering. And within a few months, I turned to alcohol because I mean, if you had my problems, you would too. I mean, I just needed some relief. Mental health drugs never worked on me. I took them even though they didn't work. This was the time of that opioid crisis was being created. So I was given Percocet and Vicodin with impunity and started to talk about drugs. Just real quick, I want you to know I never bought drugs from a drug dealer, but the doctor gave me all of them. I was going to different doctors. They're all prescribing it. The pharmacists don't care how many you're getting. I mean, I had a cabinet full, extra at all times, and I was an alcoholic and an addict. And the reason I would take these pills is because they didn't help much for pain. It's very temporary, but I would go out and I would try to get as drunk as I could, as fast as I could. And I would go to the bar illegally because I was underage, and I would go to the bars, and I remember there was a clock at the same bar I always went to, and I was like, let me see how long it takes me to get blacked out. And I would just chug shot after shot, and I would swallow the pills, because the pills just got me drunker faster, and I could black out quicker. I was in a race to black out. I never made it past 15, 20 minutes on that clock. And that's that's how quick I would get blacked out. That was my goal. I never once went out drinking and said, I can control it. I can just have one. I didn't want to have one. I was in so much pain. I was suffering so badly. I had to drink and take as much as I could to escape what was going on in here. I just needed to run away from my old brain and my own brain. And I thought it was okay because my parents taught me to work really hard. I worked so hard. I was such a good academic student. Despite all of that, I loved school. Went through high school, went to college. I would go home and do hours and hours of homework. And then I would go out to these bars I wasn't supposed to be at. My dad would come to the front door sometimes and I would race out the back, as fast as I could. And I just was trying to disappear. And then I would go home and I would throw up and I would be so nauseous. The nausea was so bad. I would get my pillow and my blanket and fall asleep on the bathroom floor because I didn't want to be away from where I was going to throw up. And then I would wake up and I would do it all over again. And I thought it was okay because I had straight A's in Vietnam and I was still functioning, wasn't I? And I worked really, really hard. And that was life for a while. And then the last 2 months, though, I was 3 months shy of my 21st birthday. And the last 3 months, I was exposed to a new medication from the doctor, which I was now taking with alcohol, of course, always. And this really, I went downhill so fast. And in 2 months, just a blackout, it was the first time I was drunk around the clock. And that I had never done before. I always thought I managed and kept it all together and separated all these parts of my life. And then I got to a point where I just don't remember. And I remember the next morning, though, of that first pill and drink that I took the day before, where I blacked out the rest of the day. And I woke up the next day and I was like, oh, I found the solution. I can wake up every day and forget the day before. And that's how sick and twisted an alcoholic's mind is. When they use the word twisted in our literature, or twisted thinking, I can really relate to that. And I didn't want help. I was hiding. I didn't want to be around anyone. I felt like all the walls closed in. It got dark. It got miserable. It got lonely. And my only solution to this problem that no doctors could help me with my mental health, my physical health only got worse. It couldn't help me there. I don't even know I'm an alcoholic and addict. I just think I need some relief. Come on now, And I finally, like I said, I was hiding. I didn't want the help. For the first time in my life, I didn't want help from anyone. And the best solution I could come up with was it's time to die. And I had been so suicidal this whole time, and I had never said out loud to anyone that I was suicidal because I knew they'd lock me up and I wouldn't be able to leave. So I kept that to myself. And my sister, who looks just like me, and has the same voice as me, and the same mannerism, and the same walk, and the same everything, convinced the apartment complex guy that she was me, and he got her into my apartment, and her and my dad and some best friends and some people I've worked with for years are all waiting there for me. and for an intervention. They had no idea what they were doing, but they were like, we just gotta do something. So somehow they figured out something was wrong. I had just dropped out of college. I was no longer working. I was hiding, didn't want anyone's help. And in 3 days' time, I was gonna jump off a bridge. And it was the only thing that felt good and felt right at the time. So I am convinced to this day that I would have done it without hesitation. And I shouldn't have even made it home on that car ride home. That's a very long story, but it's a miracle I even made it to that apartment. I should have died on the way there. I enter into this space. Now, mind you, everyone there is an alcoholic or addict, active, but they're high functioning alcoholics, and I'm low functioning at this point. So a bunch of alcoholics now got together and was like, she really needs help. I don't know what happened that night. I do know that I had a nervous breakdown almost precisely when I was presented with everybody there waiting for me and talking to me. And they told me later that you scared the hell out of us because we looked into your eyes and it looked like there was no soul behind them. And they described in perfect words exactly how I felt at the time. And I said out loud that night, they told me over on repeat, I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself. And I said the thing that I have never said out loud and would normally never say out loud. So I get hospitalized, I go into the, I was supposed to be watching the clock and I'm supposed to see it. So I go to the psych ward, of course, because I'm suicidal, and that's where I belong. And I have no recollection of the day before. I just know I wake up in a strange bed in a strange room, and it's kind of dark in the room, and I open my eyes, I have no idea what's happening, and someone's taking my blood pressure, and it's a girl I know from high school. So I looked up, I said, Lindsay, what are you doing here? And she's kind of like, what are you doing here? She didn't say anything, she just walked out. It took like 5 minutes to get up and realize where I was. And when they used the word bewildered in the literature, that was how I felt that whole week there. How did my life come to this? What am I doing here? Hadn't I kept it together? Wasn't I a straight A student? Wasn't I going to college? Didn't I work really hard and just, God forbid, listen, I was a little stressed, okay? I had poor stress management skills and it all collapsed on me. I'm gonna be fine, you know, when I get out of here. And I've never crossed my mind that I was an alcoholic or an addict ever. And I spent that week there bewildered. If you knew all that I had been given, if you knew my privilege, if you knew what I was capable of, if you knew my potential, it made no sense that I was there. That was my thought process. I leave there, and the next day, my mom, I'm at her house, and she says, call this guy. He gives me a piece of paper with Zippy's name and number on it. I said, Zippy, what kind of name is that? And then she said, go to an AA meeting with him. And I said, Hey, I'm thinking, why is she talking? I'm not an alcoholic. I'm mentally ill. What is she talking about? You know, and I was so confused. But my mom said it in her insistent way, which she almost never does. And when she insists, just do it, because you're never going to hear the end of it every day, all day. So I'm thinking, no, I'm confused why I'm even going, but she said it in her way, so I'm going to go. So I show up to a meeting, Zippy's there, and I meet him and Ross first. And we go downstairs and I meet at the Grange. And everybody seems so weird. I couldn't put my finger on it though. Why are these people so weird? And I just left the psych ward, so I'm the biggest weirdo in the land. I just got out. And it was something strange in the room that I couldn't put my finger on. And then I looked up at the 12 steps on the wall, and they might as well have been hieroglyphics. I mean, I really didn't understand any of it. But it said in one of the sentences in step 2, return to sanity. And though I didn't believe I was an alcoholic, I believed I was mentally insane. So I was like, oh, people really make a return to sanity. And then there was a chapter in the book that said, we have a solution. And all the doctors, I mean, I've been to like 100 doctors at this point. Again, I'm almost 21. I've been having these problems since I was 15. None of them ever used that language with me. You can be returned to sanity. We have a solution. They looked at me and spoke to me how I looked, which was hopeless. Everyone in the room looked at me hopeful. And even the way that you look at someone can be so powerful. No one had ever looked at me like that before. And I had a whole room of people doing that. And I very quickly realized, I was like, first off, they're saying they can return you to sanity and they have a solution. Let me just try it, because I've tried everything else. I don't think I have a problem, but I'm just going to come and I'm just going to do this thing and let's see if it works. And within a very short time, there was irrefutable evidence that it was working so well on me. And they say you have to do the first step perfectly. Listen, they talk about unmanageability and powerlessness in the first step. Okay, unmanageable, I just let the psych ward got it. Like that part, right? But the powerlessness part just never resonated with me. And you know what? I just kept moving through the steps. Because I was like, that's good enough for me. I got half of it. I'm just not going to drink. I'm just going to keep moving through these steps. And Zippy and Ross, oh, I vouched for these guys. They took me everywhere. They did everything. When we went to meetings out of town, they had me speak at a rehab, and I was a few months sober. And at the time, I'm like, why am I speaking here? But it makes perfect sense now. And they took me to these other youth programs, and then we would just go for rides and go to meetings out of town. And we just had the time of our lives. And I was having fun, and I was getting better. And I was aggressive and rude and all these other things. And they'd be like, you're a breath of fresh air. And I'd be like, why did you say that? So I am very clumsy, so we keep a drink down there. But and like we went to a meeting out of town, and I had read the big book, and the big book made no sense to me. I loved the 12 and 12. I always started, and I still love the 12 and 12. But at the time, I read the book, it made no sense. We went to a meeting out of town, and I'm so enthusiastic, and I'm like, oh my God, this program is amazing. They should write a book about it. And somebody holds up a big book they did, and I was like, yeah, that book sucks. I read it, you know. Zippy's apologizing for me wherever we went. We went to multiple conventions a year, and these conventions and these speakers just blew my mind. And I was getting better, and I just couldn't believe I was getting better where nobody else can help me. Not convinced for a long time, years, that I was an alcoholic or an addict, but there was just irrefutable evidence that it was working. And then and I was so rageful when I came in. I should really remember to say that. I felt like this is not fair. Nobody should be 15 with bipolar disorder and arthritis and nightmares, night terrors every night of their life, and PTSD symptoms and all of this stuff. This is not fair, and nothing was my fault, and I was a victim. And how dare you and everyone else for making my life hell so that I ended up in a psych ward and I ended up in AA of all places. And it was just, but then I met Pam. And Pam became my sponsor, and she said, this is a 12-step program, you are going to work the steps. And she was a step thumper, and because of that, I am a step thumper to this day. And I got to step 3, and it talked about God's will, and those words by itself made no sense to me. So I went to meeting after meeting frustrated. What does that mean? And I just couldn't get it, and people would tell me their own versions, and it didn't make sense. And finally, someone said, just do the next right thing. That's God's will for you. So for a long time, that's how I lived every day. Any moment of any indecision, what is the next right thing right now? This one thing I need to go with, and it never failed me. I was so happy when I figured that out. It really led to a lot of joy. And then Pam and I got to step 5. And I'll never forget this night for as long as I live. I go to her house, and it's not planned for me to go to a meeting after. We get through it, and she says, at the end, is there anything you left out? And thank God she asked me that question, because I said, yes, I drank for one night 8 months ago. I tried to tell myself, but I was so ashamed when I went to the meetings, I couldn't. I said, and now they're announcing my anniversary, and I'm freaking out. And it's a small town, everybody knows everybody, and announcing my anniversary. And she says, well, you know what you have to do. I said, okay, I'm gonna tell myself. So I leave her house, and I make it to the grave within 2 minutes of the meeting starting, not planned. I walk down the stairs. There's usually about 25 people in this room. I walked down the stairs, I swear on God, it was 125. This night, only, never was that room so filled, okay? Irish Larry, God bless his soul, rest in peace, was celebrating like 50 years or something crazy that night. So I get down there, and I said, I felt like such a loser. My name's Eleni, I'm an alcoholic. I said, I drank 8 months ago, and I didn't tell any of you, and now you're announcing my anniversary, and I'm really sorry, I'm not going to be celebrating. And this room of over 100 people erupted in applause. And I can still hear it in my mind every time I think of it. They lost their minds the way they were clapping and cheering and standing up. And this went on for minutes, and then they were like, go to your shit. And then they're just like losing it again. And I learned that day that when I feel like a loser, AA shows me why I'm a winner, because that takes strength, and that takes honesty, and that takes still coming back, and still not drinking, and still doing the next right thing. That takes a lot. That's hard. And that's what they were celebrating. And then for weeks following that, people would walk up to me one by one and say, you know, because you told the truth about that, I told the truth about this. And I was shocked at the impact I was having on people just from one display of brutal honesty, even when I was ashamed and even when I didn't want to do it. And I really understood what AA was that day and how they will lift you up when you feel like you're at your lowest and show you that you are a winner. And that's the core of this whole program. And then I had people who really looked out for me. There was this guy, Frank, who I was hoping to see today. And he worked for my parents many years before. And he really made it a point to look out for me, did a lot for me. And he came up to me a couple years after I knew him, and he said, you know, I was a really awful employee to your parents. And I've been making it a point to be really good to you, to me, as part of my making amends. So it's just amazing how this program has that ripple effect. And I have this person that I love so much who's always going out of his way for me. And then I had met Richard when I first came in, rest in peace to Richard as well. And I went to high school with his son. And so he felt the need to look out for me because I went to high school with his son. And I was maybe a year at the most in at this point, and I was having one of my chronic nightmares that I had every night of my life. And I would wake up terrified from the time I was at least 4 years old. And I'm having this nightmare where I walked in on a group of guys up to no good, doing some criminal stuff, and I wasn't supposed to see what I saw, so I turned around and ran as fast as I could, and they're chasing me with these huge guns, and I'm running for my life in this dream, and I'm outside, and Richard appears in the dream. And as soon as he appeared, all the men disappeared. I started to walk instead of run. My breathing returned to normal. He put his arm around me, and he said, "It's okay, Eleni, you're good with me." And my nightmare stopped after that. And I've had 20 years now of being able to sleep without waking up every night terrified. And I knew then, and I know now, that it wasn't just about Richard. Richard represented all of AA. And I finally came to a place where I felt safe. And I'm a person who has always sought out safe communities because I grew up terrified. And I always sought out safe places. And there is nowhere safer than AA. I have been to so many amazing communities, and there is no other place on the planet like this. I just love it. And I proceeded to work through the steps. I worked another step 5. I have never stopped working the steps since I walked in, because the miracles from those steps have always been so monumental. I just want more of them. The spiritual awakenings that keep coming all these years. I'm never not on a step. And I would go from 1 to 12, and then I would start over again. I was so impressed by what was happening with your steps. So I do another step 5 eventually, and all this rage and aggressiveness and anger, because I was the girl back in the day. I'd throw a cinder block through your windshield while you stood there and hope you said something so I could pop off. You know, I was that kind of girl. So angry, so aggressive, so in your face, just please look at me wrong so I can start something. And I did a step 5, and obviously I was getting a lot better with time, but this is like maybe 5-8 years in, something like that. And I was on my way home from doing that step 5 with her, and I hadn't experienced much on the 5 itself. But on my way home, in the snap of a finger, in one moment, all the anger that I had been carrying all those years and all of my victimhood had just lifted off of me. And I felt free. I felt freer than I had ever felt. And then 2 weeks, and I was feeling that way for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I woke up with my worst resentment in my head. I got in the shower. I'm having that imaginary argument with someone who's not there. You know what I mean? That I used to have all the time. And I hadn't had it for 2 weeks, so now I'm noticing that I'm actually doing that. And I said to myself, whoa, I don't feel free anymore. This feels really bad. There must be something I can do. And I swear I had a thought that was not mine that said, sometimes you're just going to have to forgive people over and over again. So in that moment, in that second, right then, I said, nope, I chose to forgive. I let this go. I forgive. And that feeling of freedom returned. And that's when I learned consistency. There's something, just like how we don't drink one day at a time, there's a whole lot of other things we got to do day in and day out. And my bipolar disorder was getting much better at managing this over time because I had learned that. I had learned about no matter how you feel, go get up and do what you got to do. And I had heard mood follows action. And I had a mood disorder. So when I heard that, it hit me really hard. And I was like, okay, I can't control my thoughts. I can't control my insanity. I am naturally pessimistic. I am naturally this and that, but I can do something, which is going to make me feel better, which is then going to change my thoughts. So like I reverse engineered it instead of start with just change what's up here. And I followed actually to this day. I graduated, I had dropped out when I first came to a few weeks before I came into the program. When I came to the program, I re-enrolled right away back in school. I know we're not supposed to make major changes and all that, but I re-enrolled back in school and I had brain fog real bad. So I had about a year left. So I get through the year of that bachelor's degree, and when you walk the stage, you don't get the real degree, you get a fake thing. So the real degree came in the mail. The one afternoon ever my mother was home, because they were always at work, right? So my mom's home that random afternoon. I open the envelope, I'm sitting down, she's standing over my shoulder, looking down, and it says, we read it at the same time, Bachelor's of Behavioral Science. And she said, Eleni, I thought your degree was in sociology. And I said, so did I. I was so drunk the first time here. And the last year I had such bad brain fog, I just didn't even know. I know, it's a true story. So then, well, my mom loves a funny story, but she never told me. And I found out the hard way, non-alcoholics do not find it funny. So I finished that bachelor's degree. I went and got waited a year, went back and got a master's degree. I finished with a 4.0 in teaching. And that's when I remembered everything now. And like I felt like I remembered everything. And I felt like my brain had grown. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to go off and be a teacher. And the old guys, now I say old because I was 20. Everyone looked like they were 60. I have no idea how old they were. But I just thought everybody was older. There was no young people in the meetings back then at all. And I was the only one. And all those old guys, though, they would come up to me and say, I'm so proud of you. And I had never heard it before. And then like another, and then another, and another, and they would walk up to me and say, I'm so proud of you. And it still makes me cry to this day when I think about it. He was so kind. And that's why the small things matter. The way you look at someone, the way you have hope in your eyes when you look at them, and the way you say, I'm proud of you, even for the smallest accomplishment, even if you just didn't drink today, I'm proud of you. It's a big deal. And then all these amazing things happened. I moved, all these promises started to come true, and I moved to North Virginia right outside of DC, and I thought it was the coolest place ever, and that's where I still live. And then I taught for a few years, and I did a good job being trusted with kids, and then I started a business, and now I do after-school programs for kids, which I've been doing for the last 14 years. Like I do Zumba, and basketball, and yoga, and all this different stuff. And I never even wanted to be an entrepreneur, and it just fell into my lap. And it just happened to meet this one person, and these things that started happening were just wild. I left Western medicine behind as far as the arthritis went because they couldn't help me, and I cured it myself by using Eastern healing modalities. So now I wasn't struggling with the pain anymore. Now my emotions were put together because the 12 steps of AA did more for me than 15 years of therapy could do for me. And I'm not knocking therapy, but that's literally how amazing the 12 steps are. And I just kept following mood follows action. And then I bought a house, which would have been impossible for someone on a teacher salary living outside in the suburbs of DC. And all of these amazing things happened. And my 30s were up and down. I had some good years. I had some bad years. And I remember during that time calling, it was because of relationships though. And I called my sponsor during that time and I said, Deborah, I feel like every problem I have now, the only problems I have are coming down to relationships. And she said, welcome to the big leagues. Okay, this is what I was about all along, right? So then that started a really long journey that I'm still on to get my relationship right. And I was just living such a charmed life. And if you had asked me what my worst nightmare of my 25-year-old self was, I would have said being 40 and never married and not having kids and having a picture of me and my dog framed on my desk. That was by far my worst nightmare. I am 42 and I don't even have a dog. And I am happier than I ever could have imagined. And that's why God's will, which is God's plan, is better than ours. And then COVID happened. I don't know if anybody else was affected by COVID, but it was the worst 2 years of my life. My business closed overnight when the schools closed, March 11th of 2020. I had nothing to do, which is like my kryptonite, nothing productive to do. I had no people to be around, which is my second kryptonite because I just can't stop talking, so no one was leaving their homes. The only thing I could do was go on a dating app and find a guy, and we became codependent, so we went through a bad time in our lives. And then I fell into this 2-year depression. 2 years, and I don't know what was worse, my rock bottom at the psych ward or this 2-year depression. I mean, that's how bad it was. And the walls closed in on me again, and it got so dark, and for some unexplainable reason, my mania had disappeared, so I didn't have anything to pull me. Always pulled me quickly out of the depressions, and I was like, how did everybody else live without mania? How do they feel happy? How do they feel joy? How do they feel passion? How do they fall in love? I mean, I'm thinking all kinds of crazy thoughts because I'm just going through it mentally. And but this time I wasn't suicidal. This time I just knew, I would say to myself, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you just can't do it yet. Because I would go and have been to hundreds of meetings with people who had been through 10 times worse things as being depressed and stuck in your house during COVID, and they made it out the other side. And because I had heard so many of those stories, I just knew I would be another one of those stories eventually, and eventually it would get better. And the sun would come up, and every morning I would say, the goddamn sun came up again. When I opened my eyes, I was depressed. And then I finally did what I was avoiding, and I broke up with that person, and within a few days, I felt better. And then within a few weeks, I felt joy like I had never felt before. And I think for other people, it would have just been baseline normal to not be depressed anymore. For me, to just not be depressed before, after being in the depths of hell, I was just so overjoyed. I was the happiest I had ever been. I was like a person who once had sight and lost it for 2 years and got it back, and now all they can do is look around all day in amazement. And that's what I was doing, and tears of joy were streaming down my face, and I was so grateful to God, and this went on for such a long time, and I was just so happy. I said, this God is so good. This program is so good. I get to live a life beyond my wildest dreams. It doesn't even make sense. And when I first came in, people would stand at the podium and tell their story at the Grange here in Dover, Delaware. And they'd be like, I'm so, what did they say? I have a life beyond my wildest dreams. And if you could see how I rolled my eyes and turned my neck every time they said it, because I didn't believe them. I thought it was a good tagline. It sounds good in AA, and that's why people say it when they come up here and talk. But I didn't know that it didn't mean that their life turned out perfect and they had no regrets and they're flying around on a private jet. It means that they can't believe they can feel how they feel inside. Because my 20-year-old self could never imagine feeling this good. It is unimaginable. And I'm such a grateful alcoholic because I really believe that if I had only had bipolar disorder and I had only had arthritis and PTSD and nightmares and everything else, and I wasn't also an alcoholic, I really believe I would have lived a really long and hard life because the doctors can only help so much with that, and I come here and this place did more for me than all of them combined. And then I was tears of joy streaming down my face on a regular basis. So happy, so grateful. I wasn't asking for anything else. I didn't want anything better. I was like, this is the best it's going to get. Thank you, God. This is amazing. I didn't need anything to change. And then it actually got better. And then I was blown away. So I am walking out of a meeting one day, and a guy had been showing up for several weeks. And I paid no attention to him because there was a whole wave of new faces. I didn't pay attention to him. And I just didn't get to know these people. I knew other people really well around me. And me and this one guy, who I'd never spoken to yet, walked out at the same time from this meeting. We're both walking to our cars. We just happened to be the only two walking out at the same time. And we had like a 2-minute conversation on suicide because I had shared about how suicidal I used to be and how I'm so grateful that I'm not thinking about killing myself all the time now. And of all things to be talking about, we're having a really hype conversation about suicide. And then 20 seconds into this conversation, it felt like I got hit by a lightning bolt and I was thrusted into the 4th dimension and I finally understood what those words meant. And the way God did it was he let me see what was inside of that guy. And I guarantee you, this guy didn't have a lot of time sober. I guarantee you that guy thought he was broken, just like I always thought I was broken. No matter how good anything ever got, there's always a little voice in the back of my head. There's something wrong with you, Eleni. There's always something you got to be working on. Always something you got to fix. And I'm sitting there talking to him, and I have this lightning bolt. It was 1 second. It lasted 1 second, and it was as if God pulled the curtain back and let me see the other side just for that moment. And I saw the God. I saw the soul inside of this person, and he worked as a mirror. And then I understood that same power, that same love. I understood the term the Alpha, the Omega, the omnipresent. God is always conspiring to help you, and he is so powerful. And I saw it in that person, and I understood that same force was inside of me, and it's inside of everybody else. And that's why people have always healed me, because God is in people, and that's why you guys are able to do it, whether you realize it or not. That's why you can heal me, because God is inside each and every one of you. And I figured out that day, right what I saw, right in that 1 second, that we are all perfect. And I know that's a hard statement to understand, because we're all have all these imperfections, all these character defects we have to work on. At our soul level, we don't change that much. At our personality level, we are who we are. The only things we have to fix and change and work on and do different is that which is causing us to be unkind to ourselves and unkind to others, which we learned usually from well-meaning people. And I learned all of that in that 1 second. It was and things just changed and rearranged dramatically inside of me from that moment. And it was as if God said, we have done it your way for 20 years and you don't listen. So now we're just going to do it my way. And he made more progress inside of me in 1 moment than I, with my sparring energy, had done for 20 years. And that's That is how good and that is how powerful this God is. And I know it was a long road for me. It took a lot of years, but it took that because I don't listen the first time. I listened the 10th time. Sorry, I'm not cursing with you. And I told him I wouldn't curse today. And then I started working. And then for months after that, these huge spiritual awakenings continued to happen. And I was further shocked. And I go, can this get any better? This is God, I don't need it to get better. I'm good. You know what I mean? And then he kept shining a light on character defects that I didn't know I had. So all these years, I had been working on what was obvious: rage, anger, irritability, the way I talk to people, attitude, all these things. And I was walking around, I was 40 years old. I couldn't believe I'd been walking around with all of these releases and behaviors and thoughts that I didn't know I had. And the CD from Jack Quarterman finally made sense. This guy had recorded the most amazing set of CDs. I don't even know how I got my hands on them. I used to listen to my car on repeat. And he said, denial is a treatment center word. Delusional is an AA word. And I had no idea what that meant every time I heard it. And then fast forward all these years, God starts shining a spotlight on all these character defects that I need to work on. And he wouldn't let up. It was like one after another that I was totally unaware of. Like, I didn't know that I had no boundaries. I didn't know that. I didn't even use the word boundaries. You know what I mean? And people were just running all over me. And I didn't know that I couldn't say no. And I didn't know that I made myself uncomfortable to make other people comfortable. And I didn't know that I was always trying to behave and act and talk in a certain way so that you would like me. Because at the end of the day, I wanted you to love me. And that's when I finally understood. When when they say, people would say, I'm a thief, I'm a liar, I'm a control freak, I'm this, and I'd be like, oh, I'm glad I'm not as bad as them. You know what I mean? All these years later, I start to get this light shown on all these ways that I'm acting and behaving. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, it was just incredible. And I started to work on all of these things. They say uncover, discover, discard. And I started to let all of that go. And I even realized that I had been holding everyone in my life, even my mom, who I'm the absolute closest to right here. Everyone was at an arm's length, and I had a mask on for the whole world. And when I had that moment experience of being thrust into the fourth dimension, I understood that I could let people in. I understood I could drop the veil, and I could just be myself, and I could stop being such a people pleaser, and people would love me anyways. And I had heard years ago, there's a saying I heard a spiritual teacher on a CD say, there's a spiritual solution to every problem. And that's such a black and white statement that I spent years thinking about that. Because that's 100%, that's all or nothing. There's a spiritual solution to every problem. And now I thought about it, is it true or is it true? I think there's a spiritual solution to a lot of problems, but every problem. And then as I went through this process of the fourth dimension and the spiritual awakenings, I understood that the solution to every problem I had is deep connection with God and deep connection with people. Because again, God is his people and that's how people feel more. So the guy was right. There is a spiritual solution to every problem. And I just, I know I've said a lot. But, and I talk fast. I do want to say, though, that every character defect can be turned into an asset. So you have someone like me who used to be aggressive and cursing you out and in your face and want to start a fight and blah, 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 right? Too strong in that direction. Now, when I handle those character defects, and I learn to speak calmly and professionally when I need to, and politely, and people aren't going to listen to say it a certain way anyways, and learn how to actually talk to people, what I was left with, and I forgave, and all of that was gone. What I was left with was a really strong person. And this Wednesday, I have a very important meeting because there's someone very corrupt in my industry who is unethical and greedy and messing up the entire industry that I work in Northern Virginia. So this Wednesday, I have a meeting with someone because everyone else is too afraid to say something. And I'm going to be the one to go and call out the bad behavior and the unefficacy and the greed and all of that. Because I'm not going to go with an attitude. And I'm not going to go in aggressive. And I'm not going to go in cursing. I'm going to, the way I present myself, it's going to make them listen. You know, and so every character defect can be turned into an outlet. And I finally, step 3 evolved a lot for me over the years. It's God's will. First it was do the next right thing. Then the words God's will became God's plan, better than mine. That's how I interpreted it later. And now it's I do the footwork and I leave the results up to God. And there was something, I finally got it this summer. I was on a plane from Athens to Santorini. And I had given a friend of mine something that they needed to know like 5 days before, and then they had left for Greece 5 days before. And I handed it to him before he went on the plane. And I had been nervous for months about this person's reaction to this information. And I was really nervous for those 5 days. I didn't hear anything. And then I'm on the plane to Santorini, and I said a prayer because of what I had heard in the Zoom meeting the day before with these people in England. And I said a prayer, and I said, God, I pray for his happiness above all else. And I pray for my happiness as well, no matter how this turns out. And tears streamed down my face because I felt myself letting go. I had done all the footwork. There was nothing left for me to do except wait and see. And I knew in that moment that I was willing to accept any outcome, any reward, but most importantly, any consequence. And then I really got it. This is the next right thing. I have done the footwork. I'm going to leave the results up to God now. And tears streamed down my face on this flight. I got off the plane, and 1 hour later, that friend texted me and said, my life is infinitely better than you in it. I love you so much. Thank you for everything you have done. You're just the most incredible person I know. And I was so scared and so worried about it. And 1 hour later, when we let go of the result, it's amazing what can happen. And, you know, I'm not saying that life's not still hard. I'm not saying things don't still happen. I didn't know that you could have something really hard going on and still at the same time have this underpinning of joy and gratitude. Because up until like a few years ago, maybe even a year ago, I either had a good day or a bad day. That's all it was, you know? And now, like, I'm going through something I don't even know how to explain. I'm walking around feeling it. How is it possible that I'm struggling with something so hard right now, but I still feel the joy and the gratitude, even on those bad days? I don't even know how to explain that, but I'm experiencing that now. And even when I go through really hard times, so let's say last summer, I felt deeply, deeply betrayed by a friend. I think she felt betrayed by me. I think I'm innocent, but okay. So I felt deeply betrayed by this friend in this situation. And I couldn't believe the whole thing that was happening. I couldn't believe how bothered I was by it. I couldn't believe this happened with someone in the program. I never had a problem with anybody for years, much less anybody in the program. And I was so hurt by the whole thing. And in the end, I realized something, because right when it started, I said, God can use anything and everything to my advantage. Somehow, this is going to work out to my advantage. And it did. And what I learned through that whole thing was that even if you attack me, like, give me your best shot. Because the worse it is, the more God's going to use it to my advantage. Don't bring me anything frivolous, because now I'll just swat you away. Now I can handle that. Give me something good. Hurt me as hard as you can. Let me go through some pain, because God will use you as my stepping stool, and then he will thrust me forward. And that's what happened, and that's how it works. And God is so good. He will do it for them too. Oh, guys, there's no place like AA. I have been to many communities, and I'm telling you right now, this is the best one. I heard someone say we're giving away gold here, and I never heard it said better. And then I also heard when I first walked in, bondage of self. I didn't know what it meant then, but it hit me and it never left me. And the only one who binds me up is me. The only one who can stop me is me. Nobody else. I know the power of this God that is inside of me now, and nothing can stop me. I am capable of anything, and so are you, for the exact same reasons. Thank you for letting me share.